Her scream started as a thread and unspooled into the cabin until it trembled in every plastic panel and cup of water. The plane shivered. Someone muttered. A call button chimed. Iris's hands clamped over her ears, elbows locked, shoulders tight as a bow. The flight attendant hurried down the aisle with practiced softness that still felt like a rush. Beside the window, the woman in the winter coat, the one people knew by articles and earnings calls, but not by the quiver in her breath, whispered her daughter's name like a promise she was trying to keep from breaking. A man in the row behind stood up and asked nothing with his mouth and everything with his eyes. The woman nodded. He knelt. He set a small toy Jeep on the tray table and rolled it slow enough to be a heartbeat. Left wheel, right wheel, he said, voice low as a steady road. We can drive through a storm. The girl's fingers shook, but one lifted, and the sound in the cabin softened, not because the sky changed, but because something closer did. Hours earlier, the jet bridge smelled like coffee and rain. Illyria Vale held Iris's hand, not as a leash, but as a tether to a world that moved too loud, too bright, too close. At the door, the flight attendant smiled with the kind of kindness that lives in bullet points. Illyria answered with an executive's composure and a mother's dread. Iris kept her gaze on the seam where the carpet met the threshold, stepping with careful precision, humming quietly, the same 3 notes. The sketchbook pressed against her chest like a shield. The first page showed a road drawn in pencil, straight lines and careful numbers along the margin. 4, 8, 12. Multiples were safe. They were doors that opened the same way every time. Seat 17A, Illyria murmured, making her voice a blanket. Window, like you like. She had memorized every trick, every ritual, every grace that could be made from the shape of constraint. Noise-canceling headphones. Orange slices in a small bag. The letter folded 3 times and kept in the inner pocket of her coat. A note from Iris's teacher with few lines that always steadied her. Iris is not a problem to solve. She is a language you are learning. Keep going. The aisle narrowed with suit jackets and backpacks, and the impatience of people who believed their time was more expensive than anyone else's. Illyria lifted the carry-on, felt the pull in her shoulder, felt the long, thin tear and a good night's sleep. Iris hesitated when a child laughed too sharp. Illyria shifted to block the sound with her body. Need a hand? Asked a voice that had the texture of river stones. Illyria turned. The man behind her was broad-shouldered without trying to be, hair a little unkempt in a way that suggested he had been busy with someone's smallest needs. His jacket was clean but tired at the seams. The watch on his wrist had a cracked face and kept time anyway. A boy at his side pressed close. 7, perhaps. Solemn eyes and a toy Jeep in his pocket. I've got it. Illyria said automatically, the reflex of someone who is always seen as capable. It came out sharper than intended. Of course, he said, already lifting the suitcase with a gentleness that had nothing to prove. We're 18C and D, he added to the air, perhaps so she wouldn't feel cornered by help. I'm Illyria, she said, and the name felt strange in economy class, suddenly too large. Jonah, he replied. This is Eli. Eli gave a breath of a smile, the kind that appears on a face as if it's been rehearsed, but genuinely. Iris did not look at either of them. She slid into 17A, pressed her forehead to the oval window, and watched the service truck stitch the tarmac with lines of light. Illyria tucked the letter deeper into her coat, as if a piece of paper could be a talisman against the way engines roar. Takeoff is predictable for almost everyone but them. For Iris, it was 1,000 doors slamming. Illyria prepped the sequence. Headphones on, orange slice offered, the rhythm of numbers in a whisper. 4, 8, 12. The ritual was an anchor, but anchors do not still the sea. They keep the boat from drifting so far forget shore. Years of leading men who could swallow markets had taught Illyria the physics of posture. She, too, moved through turbulence by keeping her face still. But a mother's body betrays her in small heat signatures. The quickening of a pulse, the micro-lean toward danger, the hairline fracture at the surface of calm. Jonah read to Eli from a thin book whose cover had been mended with tape. Bravery in storms. His voice was soft, not performing, the way one speaks at a bedside. Eli leaned in, head on his father's shoulder, the toy Jeep now a worry stone in his palm. At the worst, rain is a lesson left on the porch to dry. Eli's mouth tipped upward. A bump spiraled into a tremor, and the tremor into a steady shake. Someone laughed to make fear sound like something else. Someone else sighed their judgment like attacks. Iris's hum sharpened, her shoulders narrowed. She pressed her palms to the cups of her ears, then to the window, then to the seam of the tray table, looking for a seam in the sky. Ilara laid her hand over Iris's hand and breathed deeper than was comfortable. 4, 8, 12, she said. Like steps, we can take them again. But steps on the ground are not the same as steps in the sky. The scream unspooled. It wasn't loud so much as total. People turned the way people do, as if their eyes could solve anything. A flight attendant approached with the kind face of someone who longs to help and the toolkit of someone who must help everyone at once. "I'm sorry," Ilara said to the air, apologizing to strangers for her daughter being a person. The apology tasted like something old and unworthy. Jonah rose without drama. He met Ilara's gaze as if he were asking to borrow nothing more consequential than a pen. She nodded, because some moments are not a question of pride, but of breath. He knelt beside Iris, slow enough to be readable, far enough not a crowd, close enough to be present. "Eli's got a Jeep," he said to the table, not to the girl. "He believes it can handle anything, but I'm not so sure. Sometimes it needs another driver." He set the toy down and rolled it forward an inch, then back. "Left wheel, right wheel," he murmured. "We can drive through a storm if we go slow." "Iris," Ilara said, "this is Jonah, and that is Eli. Names are bridges if you speak them gently." Iris kept her head tilted toward the window, but the line of her mouth loosened a fraction. Her fingers trembled. They reached, then retreated, then reached again. One landed on the Jeep's roof. The tires made a small sound like secrets. Eli leaned over the seat back and whispered, "It's brave. I think you're braver." It was not praise. It was a fact he held like a marble. Jonah's voice was a metronome. Tiny turned to the left. "You feel that? That's the plane, not you. The plane can be noisy. You can be quiet. Left wheel, right wheel. Roads always find a way through." Ilara watched. She had coached executives through crises, rebuilt divisions from rumor and ash, testified to rooms that wanted her to fail. She had never felt this exact sensation, a stranger making space around her child like someone cupping a flame without smothering it. The cabin changed in ways that never show in safety cards. The man with the side turned away, not from disgust but from the wish to give privacy. A woman across the aisle lifted the corner of her mouth and dabbed at her eyes as if no one would notice if she moved small. The storm outside remained itself. But storms and people are not the same category of thing. The Jeep rolled. The scream wound down into a sob, then into a breath with a hitch in it, then into something plainer, a girl breathing on a plane. Iris's numbers drifted out like threads and folded back into her lap. 4, 8, 12. The threads held. Eventually, Iris slept, her cheek on Ilara's sleeve, her palm on the toy. Ilara let her own head find the hollow of the headrest and stared at the tiny fracture in the plastic ceiling, a hairline crack that the airline probably knew about and monitored and had judged safe. She thought of all the hairline cracks in her days, each one a place like gets in if you stop pretending you're glass. "Thank you," she whispered, because sometimes gratitude must be spoken while the person who deserves it is still near enough to hear. Jonah lowered himself back into a seat, his knees complaining the way knees do when they've lived. "No need," he replied, not dismissive but precise. "Sometimes the thing you know is the thing you get to give." His eyes went to Eli, who was watching with a look that held both history and future. "We've practiced storms." "Your son," Ilara said. "Had a season," he answered. "Still has them sometimes." He didn't offer details as currency. The love was enough to recognize itself. Ilara touched the letter in her pocket, then slipped it out. The paper had softened at the edges from being unfolded and refolded like a prayer flag. She watched Iris's chest rise and fall. She pressed the letter flat on her lap to smooth the creases, then folded it again with care. The world offers few things you can control, The shape of a fold can be won. "May I?" she asked softly, and then stopped, because she didn't know what permission she needed exactly. She only knew that she wanted this man to know that he had entered her story at the precise place where it had needed a small, steady word. "Yeah," he said, and the word felt like a chair pulled up to the table. "When people look," she said, "I forget that looking is not always a verdict." "Most folks don't know how to look," he said. "They haven't learned the language." "My teacher wrote that," she murmured, surprising herself by using the word teacher as if she were still a child. She offered the letter. Jonah didn't read it. He just held it by the edge, acknowledged it as something sacred, and handed it back. The rest of the flight moved like a slow tide. Coffee cooled. Sunlight found a thin part in the clouds and spilled a little gold on the armrests. Eli fell asleep with his hand in his father's. Fingers knotted as if the rope between them were both unbreakable and made of breath. When the wheels kissed the runway, the cabin exhaled in a concert of buckles and small reliefs. Iris stirred. She blinked at the world, then at the Jeep, then at Jonah with the skittish courage of animals who have learned humans can be kind. She pushed the toy across the tray until it bumped his knuckles. "For you," she whispered, a gift in reverse. Jonah glanced at Eli, who was waking, then back at Iris. "Brave drivers keep their vehicles," he said. "That's a rule." Iris curled the Jeep to her chest. Rules were comfort when they were spoken without threat. At baggage claim, the carousel made its own weather. Ilara's assistant materialized with precise timing and a list of contingencies. But it all felt paper-thin compared to what just happened 30,000 feet up, where paper doesn't matter. Iris stood between Ilara and Jonah as if she had two hands and two reasons to hold them. She did not. She carried the Jeep, and that was enough. "Thank you," Ilara said again, no less earnest for repeating herself. "I don't usually—" She gestured at the air between them, the space where strangers stand. "People don't usually step in." Jonah smiled in a way that showed the boy he had been and the father he had become. "You were doing everything right," he said. "Sometimes it helps to split the weight." Eli tugged his sleeve and then looked at Ilara with the gravity of children who have made it through something together. "We tell stories on takeoff," he informed her. "It's our ritual." Ilara nodded, feeling the words settle into her bones. "We count numbers," she said. "It's ours." Rituals shook hands and recognized each other. A suitcase thumped onto the belt. Another. Jonah reached for one that had suffered too many airports, a stubborn zipper stitched with red thread. Ilara reached for hers, a sleek thing that spoke a language of corner offices. They looked absurd beside each other and somehow matched. Iris stepped closer to Jonah with a hurried urgency and the awkward grace of 10-year-olds. She slid the Jeep forward an inch from her chest and whispered, "Left wheel, right wheel," as if reminding him of something he had taught her, so that he wouldn't forget it himself. Jonah bowed his head, the gesture small and reverent. "Always," he said. Some part of Ilara that had been braced for years relaxed by a degree you wouldn't notice if you weren't living in her skin. She reached into her coat and pulled out an airline napkin and a pen. The napkin was flimsy, but it would do. She wrote a number and then under it, a line. "If you ever need someone to count with you, for 812, I can learn your road." She hesitated, then turned the napkin over and added something on the back, a quieter sentence she did not intend to say aloud. "I would like to see you again when the ground is gentle." She folded the napkin once, then again, like the letter, like a ritual. She held it out. Jonah took it, as if it were heavier than it looked. He didn't unfold it. He didn't pocket it quick to make the moment smaller than it was. He held it and met her eyes and let silence be the language it needed to be. "Coffee," he said, not as an offer but as a path. "I know a place that doesn't play music and leaves the lights low." "Perfect," she answered, which was not a word she trusted. But this time it fit. Eli leaned into Jonah's side and Iris leaned into Ilara's, and for a long breath they stood as if a photograph had found them, each of them holding some small thing, Jeep napkin letter, that proved storms could be navigated when you are not expected to be both boat and shore. Outside, the night air was clean. Taxi doors thudded. The city, with all its unsolvable parts, kept moving anyway. Jonah lifted Eli with the practiced gentleness that always makes children look suddenly lighter. Eli's head found his shoulder and stayed. Iris slipped her hand into Alara's, then reached out with her other hand and touched the edge of Jonah's coat, not to keep him but to mark the fact that he had been here. "Miracles come quiet," Alara said, barely above the sound of tires and announcements. Jonah nodded once. "And leave directions," he replied, a half-smile flickering like a lamp at a window. The Jeep gleamed in Iris's grip. The napkin warmed in Jonah's hand. They parted, not like people who had ended something, but like the last sentence of a letter that promised a second page. Some stories don't end with trumpets. They end with a phone number on a napkin folded twice, with a toy car that has learned a new road, with a mother who exhales and a man who understands storms without needing to be a hero. If this one found you, let it travel. Share it with someone who waits for quiet mercy. And if you like more rooms like this, small lamplit, where second chances and found family and kindness are ordinary, stay with us. Subscribe and bring a friend. We'll keep a chair by the fire and a road drawn in pencil, ready for the next brave driver.